Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. In the lectionary, we have reached the Sunday before Lent, and the readings are focused on the transfiguration of Jesus. This event is one of a collection of events that forms an important turning point, a pivot in temporary usage in Jesus' life and ministry. It is narrated in the first three Gospels, but since for this year, the lectionary is focusing on the Gospel of Luke, the reading is taken from Luke chapter 9, verses 28 to 36. But if you're interested, the parallels are in Mark chapter 9, verse 2 to 13, and Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 to 13. And I'll be referring to the parallels in this message. As is common in the first three Gospels, in several blocks of teaching or incidents in the life of Jesus, like this one, there's a lot of common ground, but there are also individual differences. That is to be expected. If a group of us went out together and witnessed a road accident, there would be a lot of common information if we were to report on this accident later. But there would also be a number of individual details. One would mention the models of the two vehicles involved. Another would include some details on the people who were in the vehicles, and perhaps another would comment on whose faulty driving led to the accident. Similarly, the gospel accounts are similar but different. If we compare the accounts of the Transfiguration in Mark and Matthew with the account in our reading from Luke, we immediately notice two common points. One, all three begin their account of the Transfiguration with a time reference, connecting the incident to a previous one. And all three make the point that the voice from heaven that identified Jesus as God's chosen one included the directive to the hearers, listen to him. Now in Luke chapter 9, verse 28, we read the opening time reference, now about 8 days after these sayings, clearly linking the following narrative with the preceding section in that preceding section. In that incident, at a particular point, the Lord Jesus appears to deliberately open up a conversation with the disciples that focused on his identity. Who do people say I am? He asked the disciples. The disciples answered Jesus' question with a common view, that Jesus was one of the great prophets who had come back to life. The belief may have stemmed from Deuteronomy 18:18, where God said he would raise up a prophet from among the people. Jesus then asked them the same question, but who do you say that I am? It's not enough to know what others say about Jesus. You must know, understand, and accept for yourself that he is the Messiah. You must move from curiosity to commitment and from admiration to adoration. At this point, there's considerable difference between the gospel accounts. But the common point to all three gospels is that Peter, presumably speaking on behalf of all the disciples, answered, "You are the Messiah of God," in Luke chapter 9, verse 20. Matthew tells us that the Lord Jesus commended Peter for his faith and predicted that he would play a crucial role in the founding of the church or the community of faith in Jesus as Messiah. But all three Gospels agree that the Lord Jesus then warned the disciples not to publicize Peter's confession because they did not fully understand the kind of Messiah he had come to be. Not a military commander, but a suffering servant. They needed to come to a full understanding of Jesus and their mission as disciples before they could proclaim it to others in a way that would not cause a problem, perhaps a rebellion. They would have a difficult time understanding what Jesus came to do unless his earthly mission was complete. Jesus knew that they needed more instruction about the work that he could accomplish through his death and resurrection. Without more teaching, the disciples would have only half the picture. When they confessed Jesus as the Messiah, they still didn't know all that it meant. That the disciples had their own preconceived notions of the mission of the Messiah is confirmed in what happened next. In the context of the gospel tradition, this marked a basic change in Jesus' instruction to his disciples. From then on, he began teaching clearly and specifically what they could expect, so that they would not be surprised when it happened. He explained that he would not now be the conquering Messiah because he first had to suffer, die, and rise again. But one day he would return in great glory to set up his eternal kingdom. Now Luke omits what happens next. But if we borrow from the parallel accounts in Mark and Matthew, we learn that Peter reacted very strongly to what Jesus had just said. Peter was Jesus's close friend and devoted follower, and he had just eloquently proclaimed Jesus's true identity. But now he sought to protect him from the suffering that he prophesied. At this moment, Peter was not considering God's purposes, but only his own natural human desires and feelings. Peter wanted Christ to be king, but not the suffering servant prophesied in Isaiah 53. He was ready to receive the glory of following the Messiah, but not the persecution. The Lord Jesus now sternly reprimanded Peter. In his wilderness temptation, which we read in the Gospels right at the beginning of the public ministry, Jesus heard the message that he could achieve greatness without dying. In Luke, it comes in chapter 4, verse 9. Here he heard the same message from Peter. Peter had just recognized Jesus as Messiah, but here, however, he forsook God's perspective and evaluated the situation from a human one. Satan is always trying to get us to leave God out of the picture. And Jesus rebuked Peter for this attitude. Further, Peter was often the spokesman for all the disciples. In singling him out, Jesus may have been addressing all of them indirectly. Unknowingly, the disciples were trying to prevent Jesus from going to the cross and thus fulfilling his mission on earth. Satan also tempted Jesus to avoid the way of the cross. Whereas Satan's motives were evil, the disciples were motivated by love and admiration for Jesus. Nevertheless, their job was not to guide and protect Jesus, but to follow him. Only after Jesus' death and resurrection would they fully understand why he had to die. Peter and the other disciples must have been taken aback by this turn of events. But Jesus decided to do something about their lack of understanding. The time reference in Luke chapter 9, verse 28, the first verse in our reading, indicates that the incident of the transfiguration was part of Jesus's teaching. We don't know why Jesus singled out Peter, James, and John for this special revelation of his glory. Perhaps they were the ones most ready to understand and accept this great truth. They formed the inner circle of the group of 12. They were among the first to hear Jesus's call, and they had the gospel list of disciples. And they were present at certain healings when others were excluded. The example that comes to mind is the raising of Jairus' daughter. Luke tells us that Jesus took these 3 disciples up a mountain to pray. Now, Luke has a particular interest in Jesus' prayer life, and this is one of the references that are unique to him. On this occasion, Jesus' thoughts were centered on the work that lay ahead. And as he generally did, he sought to spend time in prayer. The detail that is unique to Luke's account and found in 9:31 confirms that this is correct. Also, a mountain is often associated in the Bible with closeness to God and readiness to receive his words. God had appeared to both Moses in Exodus 24 and in our reading, and Elijah also in 1 Kings 19:8-18. He met both of them on mountains. And at this point, something very memorable happened. Jesus's appearance became radiant. The other 2 Gospels, Matthew chapter 17 and Mark chapter 9, that is the Synoptic Gospels, the first 3 Gospels, describe this event with the Greek term meaning transfigure or to change the external form. Luke simply describes the outburst of radiant glory connected to Jesus's meeting with these 2 Old Testament leaders. 2 men, we read in chapter 9, verse 30, 2 men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure. Moses and Elijah were the 2 greatest prophets in the Old Testament. Moses represents the law or the Old Covenant. He wrote the Pentateuch, and he predicted the coming of a great prophet in Deuteronomy 18, verse 15-19. Elijah represents the prophets who foretold the coming of the Messiah, according to Malachi chapter 4, verses 5-6. Moses and Elijah's presence with Jesus confirmed Jesus's messianic mission to fulfill God's law and the words of the prophet. Just as God's voice in the cloud over Mount Sinai gave authority to his law, Exodus 19, verse 9, God's voice at the Transfiguration gave authority to Jesus's words. Here, Luke gives us a unique insight. While all 3 Gospels say that Moses and Elijah appeared conversing with radiant Jesus, Luke alone tells us that they spoke of his departure. That is, the topic of their conversation was his upcoming death. It is likely that at this point, the penny dropped, or the light came on, if you want. The 3 disciples began to see the connection of what was happening there and then and what had happened a little earlier. Not surprisingly, it was Peter who responded to all this, and he suggested that they ought to erect 3 tents or shelters or tabernacles one for Jesus, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. When Peter suggested making 3 shelters, he may have been thinking of the Feast of Tabernacles, where shelters were set up to commemorate the Exodus, God's deliverance of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. There's a reference in Leviticus chapter 23, which reads to the Festival of Tabernacles, which was a special celebration involving the whole family. Like Passover, this festival taught family members of all ages about God's nature and what he had done for them, and was a time of renewed commitment to God. Peter wanted to keep Moses and Elijah with them, but this was not what God wanted. Once more, Peter got into hot water by what he said. Luke merely observes. Peter did not know what he was saying. So his suggestion was bypassed, and instead, Luke focuses on the climax of the incident. A voice came out of the clouds saying, "This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him." In form, the statement seems to combine the royal messianic psalm, Psalm 2, where you have the title, "My Son," and then the servant song of Isaiah 42:1, where you have the title, "My Chosen One." In this combination, the two functions of Savior and Judge, or two comings of Christ, are united. Savior on the one hand, and Judge or King on the other. The common element in all the 3 Gospels, as already mentioned, is the instruction, listen to him. This may be an allusion to one messianic passage of Deuteronomy 18:15, which reads, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen." And the following verses make it clear that the one being spoken about, the promised Messiah, will speak on Yahweh's behalf. He will be Yahweh's spokesman. Jesus is more than a great leader, a good example, a good influence, or even a great prophet. He is the Son of God. When you understand this profound truth, the only adequate response is worship. It was difficult for the disciples to grasp the idea that their Messiah would have to suffer. The Jews who studied the Old Testament prophecies expected the Messiah to be a great king like David, who would overthrow the enemy. They did not understand that the values of God's eternal kingdom were different from the values of the world. They wanted relief from their present problems, but deliverance from sin is far more important than deliverance from physical suffering or political oppression. The mission that he had come to accomplish involves something far more. Our understanding and appreciation of Jesus must go beyond what he can do for us here and now. When you have a correct understanding of Christ, you will obey him. That was the challenge facing the disciples. And that is the challenge that faces us. We must learn to listen and to discern God's voice, which helps us to make choices, helps us to decide how to proceed in a particular situation, or to decide how to deal with difficult people and situations, and so on. As we learn to appreciate that God's ways are different from ours, as the disciples found so hard to accept, and to discern his voice and listen to it, we will develop the habit of listening so as to obey. May God give us the necessary grace. Amen.